In 1951, a 21-year-old Clint Eastwood sat in the cockpit of a World War II-era Navy aircraft, staring down at the endless stretch of the Pacific Ocean below. He wasn't an action hero then. He wasn't the cold, unshakable gunslinger people would one day admire. He was just a young man, fresh out of high school, caught in a terrifying moment that could have ended his life. Then, without warning, the plane's engine failed. The aircraft dropped like a stone. As the freezing ocean rushed up to meet him, Clint Eastwood had only one thought: I am not going to die today. The crash was brutal. The aircraft slammed into the icy Pacific waters, breaking apart on impact. The pilot, dazed but alive, surfaced first. Moments later, Clint fought his way out of the sinking wreckage, gasping for breath as the waves swallowed the remains of the plane. They were miles away from the California coast, with no radio, no life raft, and no way of calling for help. The freezing ocean was a death trap. Hypothermia would set in soon. Sharks lurked beneath the surface, but Clint didn't panic. While the pilot was in shock, Clint took control. He had no survival training, but he had something stronger: his will. "Start swimming," he told the pilot. "No one's coming to get us." And they swam. For hours. The Pacific was relentless, tossing them in all directions. The current fought to pull them under, but Clint refused to stop. He knew that fear was his biggest enemy. If he let it take hold, they were as good as dead. So, stroke by stroke, they kept going. Not because they weren't exhausted, not because they weren't terrified, but because stopping wasn't an option. After nearly 6 hours in the freezing ocean, Clint's muscles screamed for rest. His body was numb. His lungs burned. The pilot could barely stay afloat. They could see the shoreline, but it felt impossibly far. The human body wasn't built for this kind of endurance. This was the moment when most people would give up, but Clint Eastwood was not most people. He turned to the pilot, his voice hoarse but firm. "It's not over yet. Keep moving." They had already fought too hard to quit. And in that moment, something clicked inside Clint. Pain didn't matter. Fear didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the next stroke, then the next, and the next. That was the secret. You don't conquer fear by running from it. You conquer it by moving forward one step at a time. Finally, after 6 agonizing hours, they reached land. They collapsed onto the rocky coastline, too weak to stand, but alive. Clint Eastwood had stared death in the face and won. That night, Clint sat by a fire, wrapped in a tattered blanket, staring into the flames. The Navy officers who found them called it a miracle. But Clint knew it wasn't a miracle. It was a mindset. He had felt fear, but he hadn't let it rule him. He had been exhausted, but he hadn't let it stop him. He had faced death, but he had refused to surrender. That night, a lesson was burned into his soul. Life will break you if you let it. But if you refuse to quit, nothing, absolutely nothing, can stop you. From that moment on, Clint carried that mindset into everything he did. Years later, when he struggled to make it in Hollywood, he remembered the ocean. When doors slammed in his face, he told himself, just keep moving forward. When critics doubted him, he thought, pain doesn't matter. Fear doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the next step. Decades later, a journalist asked Clint Eastwood how he became so fearless. His answer was simple: fear is normal. Giving up is a choice. That was the secret behind Clint Eastwood's unbreakable mindset, a lesson learned not on a Hollywood set, but in the cold, merciless waters of the Pacific. Because when life tries to drown you, you have 2 choices: sink or swim until you reach the shore.